Morning, everybody. Diane reached out to me, I don't know, like a year ago to speak. And I was like, come on, I gotta get a little notice. And once I accepted, I was like, I'll speak, but I want you to know that Joe Scalzo doesn't get out of bed for less than $1,000. And she took me seriously. She's like, she wrote back, I think there's been some miscommunication. That quote is actually from a Parks and Recreation episode.
I should have known.
And I think he ended up getting $200 out of it. So. It's really great to be back in Youngstown. It was funny because I was like driving in here and I was making the trip. I live in North Canton and I was driving down 76 and I had this flashback to when I was interning as like a 20-year-old. Ernie Brown, 21 I think. I just turned 21 and Ernie Brown hired me to do an internship that summer. I did it in news and sports, and every time I was on news, I was horrible. And he had a folder of story ideas for interns, because back then we had a full newsroom, so they didn't actually need interns to do work, which changed quite a bit over my tenure in the Vindicator. And there was one where he had read about interesting mailboxes, so I did that story. And another one about people who mow their lawns to look like baseball fields. Like they stripe it. And I remember driving around Canfield looking for these 2-story ideas, and I walked up someone's driveway, and I said, "Hi, ma'am, can I talk to you about your lawn?" And she goes, "Are you an intern?" And I was like, "Yeah." She gave me some great stuff, but no, it was like, it was just, my time here in Youngstown was so special. I got hired a year after my internship. I was here until 2015, and it was like, it was a great place for me to experiment, because I've always been somebody who wanted to see what he could get away with in writing. I was not a straight news reporter. I was a smart aleck. I was a, but I'm gonna say, but, and the best example of that is when we had the LPGA tournament. I know some of you here are too young to remember when that was happening, but our coverage of it was pretty straightforward, and we would send everybody out there, and I just pitched to our Sportswriter, Rob Toder. I said, "Hey, how about if I just go out and write about whatever I think is interesting?" And I'm 24 years old, and I had all of the enthusiasm and none of the judgment that you need for an assignment like that. And so, twice I asked Natalie Golbus to marry me. She was a really great golfer at the time. And I always tell my wife, I'm like, "Honey, you're my silver medal."
And she's still with you.
She's still with me. She knows who she's married to. And the last year of the tournament, everybody kind of knew that it was leaving, and most of the top golfers, like I, the Storm Stand, were over in Paris for some reason. They didn't want to come to Youngstown that week. They wanted to play in Paris. I don't know why. And so the field of players was pretty lame. A lot of like newcomers, people who wouldn't normally be in there, but they got in because the bigger names hadn't been there. And so I thought it would be funny to write a story about that. And so I had a bunch of stuff about like how there aren't big names, but there are long names, and there are funny names, and there are hard to pronounce names, and believe it or not, it was actually there was a point to it, just that like, it's gonna allow somebody else to come up and make a name for themselves. And I think my last line was, "It's not a field of dreams, but it's a field of dreamers," and that's okay too. Well, one of the golfers named Dale Eggling reads this, and she comes into the meeting room, and she is furious. And she goes, "Who is Joe Scalzo?" And I'm like, "Oh." Like, that's me. And she proceeds to read me out for 10 minutes in front of a crowd about this big, a fellow journalist, just about how that was the worst story she's ever read, blah, 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 blah. And then, like, on her way out, she said, and if he was one of my horses, I would have him castrated. And so she leaves the room, and everybody in there grabs the paper, because none of them had read it, to see what I wrote. 10 minutes later, she comes back in, and she goes, I need to apologize. I didn't read the whole thing. It was actually a very nice article. And by that point, I'm like, okay. The rest of the week, I was like a pariah. They would have like literally Korean golfers who couldn't speak English coming in with a translator for the media thing, and they would point to me in the crowd and be like, basically, is that him? The tournament director at the end, I was interviewing the last day, I introduced myself, I'm like, hey, is the tournament gonna be back? And he's like, you're Joe Scalzo? You have been a pain in my egg the whole week. So, I learned how to write good stories, but a lot of times you learn by doing it that way, right? Your editor gives you the rope, and you hang yourself, and then you learn, okay, this doesn't work, because if 2 or 3 readers are mad at you, then it's probably their problem. But if everybody's mad at you, it's probably your problem. But I felt like, for all the times that they gave me too much rope, ultimately it paid off, because it allowed me to develop as a writer. It allowed me to write fun things. There's a lot of things I look back at in Youngstown, and I'm like, oh, I should have written that story, or should have wrote that story, especially in my early 20s. But I look back at my time, it's so rewarding. And I just kind of looked at what we did in sports as sort of like the dessert. And I know that a lot of sports writers, they chafe at that. In fact, Adam Earnhardt at Youngstown State, I think a lot of you know him, invited me to a panel one time at Cleveland State, and there was someone from the New York Times, the Plain Dealer, the Beacon Journal, and there was me, to talk about sports reporting. And there's always been that idea that you're the toy department, and they asked that question, and like, New York Times reporter was just talking, she was like outraged. Like, how could you say that? We cover all elements of society, from race to gender issues to, you name it. And all of them were talking about that. And I didn't actually get to me, and I was like, of course we're the toy department. Do you know how much fun I get to have in a given day? And so, one of the things they talked about was just like, hey, what is the role of sports reporting? Is it still important? And I'll get to that in a second, but I come at it from a standpoint of, we were dessert. The people on the front page were talking about what government didn't do right, what politician had taken a bribe, what school district needed a levy passed, and then we were the thing that people were going to cut out and put in their scrapbooks. And that's all I wanted to do in this world. And even though I was silly, I love sports writing. To me, it's a very important thing. Like, I have 33 books on my bookshelf of the best American sports writing of that year. I've read every single story. I have another probably 50 books of journalism-related books on my bookshelf. I have Mike Royko and Jimmy Breslin column collections. I don't have Grant Rice, but Red Smith, Frank DeFord, Jim Murray, Gary Smith, Rick Riley, Ray Thompson, Mitch Albom. These are my heroes. Like, when I went into sports writing, I didn't want to go meet LeBron James or Michael Jordan. I wanted to be next to Mitch Albom, which I've never met Mitch Albom. I'm heard he's actually kind of a jerk. So glad I didn't meet him. But even though it's kind of this trivial thing, to me it's like you read the canon. Like, you have to know, okay, before you, how you got here. And I worry about the future of our craft, because journalism is about everything. You grew up dreaming about being in Sports Illustrated. Sports Illustrated doesn't even really exist in anything like it used to. Maybe you say, okay, I can't get Sports Illustrated, let me go to the New York Times and work their sports department. Their sports department doesn't exist. It's The Athletic. They laid off everybody, or they didn't lay off, they gave a chance to work other places. So I'll get to that in a second. But I spent 14 and a half years in Youngstown, and then I got a call from the Sportswriter of the Campus Repository in 2015. I had twin girls at the time that were about 6 months old. I was so tired. The last thing I should have done in that, was like move my family from Youngstown to North Canton, but I just needed a change. And I remember, I moved there, got there, and then 2 years later, the Vindicator closed. And it was so heartbreaking because it was like part of your family was gone. And I remember thinking when I got to the repository that this was one of the best papers their size, and that type of, suburban sort of based newspaper in the country. And all I could think was, once our chain figures out how good we are, they are going to gut us. And I spent 4.5 years in a union paper. I was the last person hired. They didn't hire another reporter when I was there. And I had a list of all of the people that worked there when I was hired in 2015. And I would cross off a name every time someone took a retirement or another job. And I was like, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. And 6 months before I got laid off, our chain, Gatehouse, merged with Gannett, and I was like, there it is. I gotta update my resume. And I remember I was standing inside a Target in North Canton. It was March of 2020. I look at my phone, it was just 330-580, it didn't say where it was. I knew it was the repository. I knew it was my editor calling to lay me off. And I, as someone who had been in every single meeting for 20 years waiting for that call, knowing it was coming, and I couldn't call, I called back and was like, Joe, I have bad news. And I was like, okay. So Greg asked me what brought me to Cranes, and I said it was my overwhelming desire to continue paying my mortgage. So I got laid off in March of 2020. And I don't know if you guys remember, but that was not the ideal time to be looking for a job in anything, but particularly in journalism. It was a wonderful time to be unemployed, though, if you remember. They were giving you supplemental money on top of your regular. But so the editor of Tiger Business, a guy named Don DeTour, who had been my sports editor when I was in college at the campus repository, and I was answering phones, and he had since been the managing editor of the repository. He calls me up and says, we might have an opening. You would be covering tires and rubber for 2 trade publications, and I would be overseeing the website for that. So I'd basically be in charge of posting, making sure that the headline's good, that there's a photo, that everything is edited, that it's going out on social media, that it's going out in email newsletters. And I said, that's fine. And I remember my second day, I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? I had devoted my entire life to loving sports writing, and here I am covering thermoplastic elastomers from a laptop at my house. I was there for 1.5 years. I still don't know what thermoplastic elastomers are. I was awful. It was the first time in my life I had struggled. And I came in every morning, I gave my best effort. I really tried, and it was one of those things where, this is a bad analogy, but like Superman has superpowers, and he could always fly, and he didn't have to do anything. I had always been curious about what I was writing. Curiosity is like our superpower as a reporter, and it was gone. And I didn't know what happened. I could not get myself interested in anything. And I was like, is it gone forever? I would write stories, and it was like, there was no spark or anything, there was no life in it. And I thought, hey, there's a FedEx truck going by. I wonder how much FedEx pays. That's how bad it got. And I loved my coworkers. They were the best people. It was wonderful. You have a life raft, you pay your mortgage, but this is? Am I ever going to be a sports writer again? And then about a year and a half into it, a guy named Kevin Klebs, who covered sports business for Crane's Cleveland Business, he'd been doing it for 7 to 8 years, and just like, I can't do this. I need something else. So he left. And my boss, the entire business, he's like, I don't want to lose you, but I know this is not what you want to do. He said, you need to apply for that job. And like, that's the kind of person he was. And so then I got hired. I was like, I don't know what sports business is. I don't know what's entailed, but I can't cover tires anymore. So I went on in late 2021. Turns out that sports business, everything can be a business story. You know, you cover attendance, you can cover TV ratings. Right now, I've written 50 stories about what the Browns are going to do with their stadium. I've written about the scourge that is youth sports and just how things have gotten completely out of hand. And we are treating 9-year-old summer baseball tournaments like it's the World Series. And this dovetails to me with, as newspapers decline, as legitimate outlets decline, what happens is that these parents are susceptible to scam artists. We're going to get your kid in the showcase. He's going to be in the All-Star tournament down in Disneyland. And it's invite only, and all you need to do is pay that $3,000 entry fee. It's very exclusive. And your Facebook feed and your Instagram feed is flooded with 30 pictures of your grandkids competing in a gymnastics tournament and all these other things. And meanwhile, if you go to a high school football game now, the attendance is a fifth of what it was in the 70s. Because people are losing that community, right? They're losing that connection to their school district and what their kids are doing, but also that greater school district. You know, if you opened up the Plain Dealer or the Beacon Journal or the Vindicator or whatever in the 90s, you would get Browns, Steelers, not in Cleveland, but Indians, Bucks, Cavs, but you would also get that discus thrower that's going to set a state record, where you're going to get that story about, you know, John Carroll's basketball team winning 30 straight, or Westminster swim team about to win a national championship. You would expose those other things, and we're losing that. And to me, that's scary, because I feel like the attention then becomes on my kid. In my tournament, I'm going to yell at the officials because it's not about team, it's about my kid getting that Division I scholarship, and we got to do this and this, we got to specialize. And instead of celebrating your community and your team, you're celebrating you. And you don't need to own a printing press, you don't need to own a radio station, you don't need to own a TV station anymore to get coverage. Just put it up on Facebook. And the other part that I've seen, and this was happening when I was still at the Vindy, and it happened a lot in the last decade, is that it went from people looking for the same types of standards for sports reporting that they would see in the other parts of the paper. You were writing for fans, you weren't trying to be critical, but you were a journalist. And now, I don't know if the readers care. They want you to be a fan. They want you to actively cheer for it. They want you to then react like a fan when things are going bad, kind of like rip everybody to pieces. And you do it all from your blog, and you don't go to the event, and you're not held accountable. And if you write a rumor and it's wrong, it doesn't matter, because there's no editor saying you shouldn't do it, and you can just publish the next day. And so, I mean, look, I'm preaching to the crowd, the choir here. I know everybody here is frustrated with what we've seen to our industry. But sports in particular, there's just not a home for great sports reading. And that concerns me, because I don't want to work for FedEx. I'm 45 years old now. That seems like something that would make my back hurt after work. I didn't think about that when I was 25. I wish Ernie would have, when you interviewed me, you'd be like, go do something else. I actually had a librarian in college say, don't do this, go do something else. I was like, I'm going to show that guy. He was right. But number one, it's that we finally figured out that you shouldn't give away your product for free. We decided, you know what? Giving away your product for free, somehow that economic business model didn't work. I'm not sure what was wrong with it, but it didn't seem to bring in any revenue. And so now you go, like Craig's Cleveland Business is a subscriber base. You cannot get anything for free. We have every day, there's a website called SharkBeat. You can look at what story you wrote, how many people have read it, how long they've been engaged with it, how many subscribers ended up opening their wallet and paying for your journalism. And every day we go over it. Every month I have a meeting with my bosses to talk about those numbers, to evaluate what stories we've done. It's down to a data science. Some of that is good, some of that is frustrating because you miss out on some other good stories, but we are getting people to pay, and we're audience driven, and you're seeing the same thing around everybody else. You might get like, the knitting club of Struthers might be free of that story, but it's good journalism, they're asking people to pay for it. The other thing that I've been told is that Gannett is actually starting to spend a little bit of money. I keep in contact with my old sports editor at the repository. He said that anything Browns related, travel, they're paying. They're replacing people now that are leaving. We may have hit rock bottom. You don't know. We have an election coming up. Whatever that. But it seems to me that there are a few signs of encouragement if you want to get in this industry. And I know that what you guys are trying to do is encourage young journalists. And I used to joke that I wanted to set up a scholarship at Malone for people who majored in journalism and then changed it to something else. And I would report them. But we do want we need journalists, right? We need people who are going to help hold people accountable for what they do. And I see that there are some signs of hope. Specifically in print journalism outlets, even if they're not printing necessarily. And Crane's in particular is family owned. They own everything from Huntington's Cleveland Business and Crane's New York Business to automotive news. They own Ad Age. They own trade publications. And what they've done is figured out that it's great to have good journalism and people pay for it and you sell ads around it, but you also need to diversify that. So we have a lot of events like 40 Under 40 for Cleveland is a great event. It drives subscriptions, but it also gets people to open their wallet and go. We have things called Women of Note. We have networking with notables, this breakfast thing that we do that gets people together. I think the repository and similar sites did that when I was there as well, just having like year-end award ceremonies for high school kids to come in and it would be a money maker. And you make $20,000, $30,000, and maybe that's half of our reporter. So I think we're figuring out ways to do some good things. The other encouraging thing I think I've seen is that there's less busy work to do. I used to spend half of our shift, Tommy does too, typing in Jamie Jones had 5 kills and 3 blocks for the Canfield volleyball team. And you would edit stuff, and I think half our job was desk work. And now that a lot of deadlines for newspapers are basically like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you have some freedom to pursue stories that are a little bit more interesting and last a little bit longer. I know that there was so many times where I would cover a high school football game, and it was like, you got 15 minutes, and you're sitting on a stack of wrestling mats with a laptop on your lap, trying to encapsulate this incredible game and set it within 15 minutes so that you could get back and then help them put the paper out. And we're getting away from that. So even though the deadlines have gotten horrible, they've also freed you up to do some interesting things. The other part of this too is that for my entire career, I would hear people go into journalism because they're like, I want to make a difference. I want to speak truth to power. And I'm like, yeah, I need to do that someday. And I finally feel like at grades I've done that a little bit. I did tick off a lot of people at Youngstown State when I was there, particularly the football team, the coach and his wife. Particularly his wife. Eric Wolford's wife, Melinda, and I once got into a screaming match at a press conference before, like 5 minutes before Eric Wolford was coming out after a game. And I was like, I spent like 3 or 4 minutes trying to like, go, okay, let's do this another time. Get my cell phone. We can just talk about it another time. And she kept yelling at me, and I'm like, all right, you know what? Let's do it now. And we're like going like this, screaming back and forth. And then like, oh, Eric's coming. Okay, I gotta sit down. Okay, that third down call that you had there. What was the play call? But one of the things we're writing about now, in addition to youth sports, I did a big series last year about how bad it is and how we need to find some solutions. But the other thing I've been writing about a lot is just about how unbelievably dumb it is for governments to give money to billionaires for stadiums. And it's been dumb for 30 years, but we didn't have the data to study this, so economists have studied this to death, and they've discovered that giving $1 billion of public money, whether that's through bonds or through hotel taxes or whatever it is, through allowing them to take all the parking tax, it's incredibly dumb because it doesn't create new money. At least it doesn't create enough to justify that cost. You might get a little bit of money. And so I keep writing about how the Haslams are worth $8 billion. They want $1.2 billion in public money to build a dome in Brook Park. And oh, by the way, they want all of the infrastructure improvements as well, from roads to electricity to water, whatever. And they want us all to pay for that. They'll pay for the other half. And oh, by the way, they'll take all of the revenue. All the revenue. And when the stadium is built, the value of your franchise goes up. Let's say the dome is $2.4 billion. Your value of your team goes up about $2.4 billion. So there's no risk involved. And so when I met with the Browns a few weeks ago, Jimmy Haslam's wife, Dee, made it very clear that she doesn't like me. That she doesn't read anything that I write. And Jimmy's like, well, I read what he writes. But I think it's important. That's what we do, right? We tell politicians, hey, these decisions can't be made behind closed doors, and it's a bad decision anyway, but if you are going to make that decision to give money, maybe you put it in front of the voters and allow them to decide how their tax money should be paid. And so it's kind of like it's rewarding. And you know, all you people in news, you get to make a difference all these times. Where I was writing about cross country or scrapbooks for grandma. And the biggest thing I think I realized was that I didn't lose my curiosity. It's just that rubber is really boring. I still have that superpower. It's just that rubber is kryptonite. Tires are boring. I did miss out on a lot of great trips. They'll pay for you to go to like Boca Raton to view a new tire from Goodyear or something. I hope that I can spend the next 20 years of my life doing this. This is the only thing I can do. I can't dance or sing. I clearly don't know anything about chemistry or polymers, but this is what I was born to do, and I hope that I can not only find 2 decades worth of hanging on by my fingernails to do it, but that kids like me can find a home, and that they can pay their mortgage and have health insurance and all those things, you know. And your organization help them make it happen, even if it's just some small scholarships and some encouragement and some networking. And I think that's amazing. And I think it's amazing that I get to come back to Youngstown, I get to wear a Butler, and a free breakfast, and see all these people. I don't know if you have any questions, but that's my story, and I appreciate it.
I have a grandson who's going to start playing college football in September. Well, I'm sorry, he'll be joining a college football team. Whether or not he plays or not is a whole different story. What are your thoughts around paying college athletes and their ability to make changes through the portal?
I think getting paid is awesome. It's getting a little out of hand because you're getting paid not because you think that they can help you sell cars, but because, come in, I need this much money to come to Ohio State. If you don't pay me $1 million, I'm going to go to Michigan or Florida. I don't know if that's a great thing because so much of sports is about me before me. But I think the model that we had before obviously isn't very good either of, Ohio State, I'll make $200 million a year and you can get your scholarship and don't sell your autograph because if you do, you'll lose your eligibility and they'll fire some interest. That's not good. The portal, I think, is a good thing. Once, I don't know that it's a good thing that now it's unlimited because so much of sports, the value of it is learning to fight through adversity. And you listen. I didn't play, coach doesn't like me, I'm going somewhere else. And maybe you decide, I can't play here, I'm not good enough. Or maybe you go, man, I'm really good, I can play at another level. Transferring once is fine. I think having unlimited transfers is really concerning. And the other thing I think is concerning, and this is something that the presidents of Cleveland State and Kent State, I listened to a forum yesterday, were talking about, was just the gap between Ohio State and Kent State, or Youngstown State or whatever, although that's a little bit different because they're FCS football. It's getting unimaginably big, and it's only going to continue to grow. And so I think what we're seeing is there's going to have to be some sort of split because Kent and Ohio State were never the same, but it's getting bigger, and we're seeing more of it has and has-nots. The other thing I would say too is college football in particular is really bad for the body. So whatever money they can get, I'm good with that. Use the game, don't let the game use you. Ernie.
Should the NCAA just get out of college sports entirely, particularly college football? Now you have these super conferences, but basically it's going to come down to the SEC, the Big Ten. Should the NCAA just back off of football, let football do its own thing, and then they try to mess up the other sports?
And I think that's a good point because the NCAA doesn't really make any money off of football. They make their money off March Madness and the TV contract. Football is sort of separate. And I think football should be different because it's like you have a dinosaur and an elephant in basketball, and then you have everybody else is sort of the same. The concern I have is that football and basketball provide opportunities for lacrosse players, baseball players, and swimmers, and tennis, and cross country, and golf. It funds all of these programs and allows more people to have college experience. And if you take away that revenue and you divorce it from the NCAA, like, I don't know, the Title IX rules, what's the effect on women's sports in particular? I mean, women's basketball is just fine, volleyball's fine, softball's fine, but those other sports, I don't know. It's a good question. What do you think?
I think the NCAA should just concentrate on football is gone crazy college football. I believe college football needs a commission. And maybe somebody to put down some control. There's no control. So I think college football needs to be separated off. Granted, it's going to have a financial impact on those other schools that we're talking about. But there's no rhyme or reason to the rules because there are rules.
And the other thing that you're seeing is if you're a coach, you have no off season. You didn't before.
That's right.
You're recruiting 30 kids or 20 kids, and then 12, 15 of them leave because they're too good or they're not good enough or they're disgruntled. Suddenly you're having to replace them and bring in a new recruiting class. It never ends. I think the quality of life for a coach right now, if you're college basketball or college football, is horrible, unless you live for that. But I mean, you're going to need one of these to see your wife. Like, by the way, this is our show. You might remember me from our wedding. I haven't seen you since then. That's to me, it's concerning. It's just, it's not just what's happening to players, but I think the coaches. And the head coach can find making $5 million or $10 million. The graduate assistant who's making $5 an hour and no bathroom breaks, suddenly it's getting worse. So that's my concern.
First, a comment, thank you for the gracious way you turned down all my dishes. But then you mentioned your bookshelf. When will we see a show of Scalzo book? You have a book ideas?
So the first thing I'll say is Jim would pitch me a lot of stories about the USFL, who played Canton. And Prince Cleveland's readers don't really follow Canton a ton. They'll read maybe about the Hall of Fame Village and Hall of Fame, but there wasn't a ton of interest. But I always loved when they were good pitches. Be like, Jim, that was a really good pitch. I'm just say no. As far as a book, has anybody in here read the book? I always think of a book like a pregnancy. Like, it's there, it's got to come out at some point. And you can wait, but it's going to come out. And I don't know how people do it. I read 40 or 50 books a year. I love it. I'm interested in the process, and I have no book inside of me. I go into Barnes & Noble or Books a Million, and I think, I don't think I need to add this. I think we got enough. But, yeah, do you want to write a book?
I think I did, but I'm not ready.
I think you write a book because you have to. Yes?
Hi. So, you don't need to do a whole lot of hard things, but where do you find, and I'm wondering about this myself. I don't have kids, so I have no knowledge of this subject. But a while back, it became kind of clear that kids' football is very dangerous. And yet, I don't see anybody not covering the stories to stop them from playing. And I don't see anything about it. We all came to the conclusion that it was really dangerous for 8th graders to be hitting their heads into each other, and even for high school students to do. And then we let it go. Does the sports news industry have any interest in bringing these topics up, or are they also very glad to let it play?
I do think there have been a lot of positive changes since.
Well, that's another question.
Yeah, I mean, there was obviously a huge concussion crisis that probably peaked media-wise about 10 years ago, and the result is that our helmets have changed drastically. They're better than they have been. Practicing has changed. There's a lot less hitting. They have helmets that can measure how much of an impact you have, how often you have that impact in practice. So I think there have been changes. There have been rule changes. I think there's probably a little bit of a libertarian bent, though, when it comes to that, or just, you want to play football? Play football. The thing I would say is if you go to a game, you know, Cardinal Mooney and Ursuline and Tay or Steel Valley back in the 70s or something, it was violent, but if you go to a game between Columbiana and Southern, there aren't that many big hitters. You know, most of the guys are just hanging on and trying to drag it to the ground. So I think the context you need, you know, the level of the sport it matters to me. When I went to high school, I went to a school called Youngstown Lake. They competed in Division II, the second highest level of football. They went to the state championship game 3 times in the 90s, including the year after I graduated. That level of football, I was not good enough to play it. And then I got to the city and I've covered like Division 7, and I'm like, oh, I could have played here. You know, like, I could have just had a good experience. And I didn't go through your whole life thinking you're horrible, and you're like, oh, I just you know.
Wrong league.
Wrong league. Wrong level. So I do think ultimately there's no way to make football safe. It's just violent, and that's part of what the appeal is. But to your point, there has been a lot of moves towards offering more flag football, particularly through elementary school, even up through middle school. The western part of the state, there's a MAC conference there. They win every small school state championship every year. Nobody plays tackle football until like 7th grade. Just play flag. And they seem to be doing just fine. They dominate everybody in the state, and I think maybe that's the way to do it. Obviously, your brain is still developing as you go along. And one of the things I would say too is the Hall of Fame Village needs to make money. And so they host a lot of tournaments involving youth football, youth tackle football. They'll have tournaments in August, they'll have tournaments in December, and there's absolutely no reason for kids in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade to be playing from August to December. If you want to play tackle football, 5 or 6 games, orange slices afterwards, that's it. You don't need to go to Canton, you don't need to get your picture on Facebook. And so I think too, just that exposure to 15 games, and I'm going to be honest with you, they have tournaments where kids are 3rd grade are playing Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That should never happen. And so,
16.
hmm?
For high school, now 16.
Wow. And yeah, high school kids are playing 16 games, 6 rounds of playoffs. That's bad. You know, up until 1972, you played 10. And that's it. And then you went and play basketball. And then you went and play baseball. And now you play, or you're in track. And now baseball players play year round, and they get Tommy John surgery when they're 15, and their knee and shoulder are bad because it's just repetitive stress. I read about that too. And so that's the type of thing that I think, I don't just write about a lot of Harvard news, but once I came to Cranes, Cleveland, I do a lot more of that. I'll interview orthopedic surgeons about how dangerous this is. They'll let your kid play year round. And I think that's, you know, to your point, it's bad. Every sport can be bad if you play it year round. Maybe not water polo, but again, it's really good.
Well, just to add to that, your perspective is clearly one that can make a difference there. You made points that never occurred to me. Certainly the number of games and that kind of thing. I would simply encourage you to let that be why people come and scream at you.
You know, it's funny when I write about youth sports or something like along those lines, I get a lot of great feedback. I wrote about overuse injuries and orthopedic surgeons and stuff about against sport specialization, and I had a kid from Baltimore that found my story on the internet and ended up interviewing me for his like 10th grade high school project. And so you're like, okay, it's out there. So, and obviously there's people looking for this. They want it. They want to hear this. They need to be reminded. It's okay. You can play multiple sports. You don't need your kid playing year round. You can get a Division I scholarship with or without that, because God makes Division I athletes. Parents do not do that.
Are your daughters in any organized sports?
My daughters have played basketball, volleyball. They're in gymnastics now. They do it once a week for 90 minutes. They do not compete. They're 9 years old. And we even just found out that, hey, they can go compete now. They can move up a level where they're going to come and like have fun. And they also play a musical instrument. And if they want to try some other sports, they can. But yeah, I very much like practice what I preach on this one. But it helps that they're not that good. They're very pretty. They're very cute. But they have my athleticism.
Maybe there's a future for them in volleyball.
My daughter was in volleyball this last winter. She couldn't even like serve it over the net. And so we would just watch her hit it into the net 3 times and then she would rotate. Yes.
If you're not going to Paris, will you be looking for local connections to the Olympics?
Yeah, and it's a little tricky when it comes to the business side of it. One thing I hope to talk about is just the expense involved. I think we all dream about our kid being an Olympian, but there's a boxer from Cleveland. She had to do a GoFundMe because she wanted to bring her mom and her coach with her, and she couldn't afford it. She lives in the Glenville School District. And, so there's that. And then at the same time, there's a pole vaulter named Katie Moon, won gold 4 years ago, or was it 3 years ago? I don't know. I think COVID bumped it a year. And she gets money every time she appears from Nike. She gets appearance fees from the tournament. So there's a big dichotomy. But yeah, I think it's interesting ways to cover that, but that's what I miss about being a sports writer is like, if there's a Northeast Ohio and it's in the Olympics, that's the story, but once you're in business, the creative business, you're like, okay, what's a creative business story? I think the Olympics are awesome, mostly the Summer Olympics, and then there's also the Olympics, but it's not as awesome. Any other questions? Did I get my allotted time?
Yeah.
I was hoping to make it, because I was like, I don't know if I can speak for 45 minutes.